This is the Drake Insights Podcast, your weekly dose of cutting-edge senior living marketing insights. Join me, your host, Natasha Drake, for bold ideas, proven strategies, and inspiring stories straight from the experts. Tune in and let's conquer the senior living marketing landscape together. Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Drake Insights Podcast. I am your host, Natasha Drake from Drake Strategic. Let's get started. So on today's episode, if you didn't see the title, we are doing the top 5 content mistakes that you are making on your website for senior living communities that may be costing you conversions and move-ins. And this is really important, I think, especially right now where we are in the world of AI, algorithms, the old set it and forget it doesn't work anymore. Not that it ever really did, but now we're here to say that does not work. And so I've been hearing, I know Bryan, my guest, has been hearing communities struggling with this. And in terms of, well, what is it we're supposed to do? There's so many things, social, there's AI bots, there's ChatGPT, there's Google search. Like, what is it we're supposed to be doing? How do we show up? What's the right content we should be doing? And so I have a perfect guest for this topic. Welcome, Bryan Reynolds from Authority Agent. And the reason I'm bringing him on, listen, I could bring any digital agency on, right? We could all talk about content probably all day long and have a lot of different answers. Mm-hmm. But I think Bryan, and I know this, Bryan brings a different perspective. So like me, he is a veteran in senior living. He started at the senior living level like I did. And I think it brings a little different perspective than maybe what you're used to. You're getting that he did it on the front lines, overseeing senior living marketing, and I'll let him dig into that in a second, and then moved over to the digital agency world and has built that up into what he founded, Authority Agent. So without further ado, welcome Bryan to the show. And if you could tell them, give them a little background of your experience and explain where you came from and how you've come to form this company and why you're talking about content today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Natasha. It's a pleasure being here and being with such a strategic-minded marketing individual and veteran in the industry as well. I started with Episcopal Retirement Services 13 years ago, which is a regional not-for-profit organization based in Cincinnati, Ohio. And when I was brought on, I was really brought on to look at putting into place a digital strategy for the organization, which was kind of a unique position at the time. They weren't really hiring digital strategists at that point. It was more kind of marketing generalists. And I was given this opportunity really to kind of dig in and look at the organization, learn about the organization, and then study different philosophies. And at the time, there was a company called HubSpot that was promoting this whole thing about inbound marketing. And it just really made a lot of sense to me. And so I had hired a firm to really kind of help us on board on HubSpot and put together a digital marketing strategy that was really based on content marketing and with the idea of it really being able to attract people to your website through content, obviously through SEO, and then really building authority within this space of senior living. And throughout the years, Rome's not built in a day. So we started with content and built the social media and then built an e-newsletter program, built maybe some taxonomy onto our program that organized our content. And what the funny thing is, it really started growing and growing and growing. And we started seeing more content come organically. And then we started integrating it with all of our other channels, whether it was offline, traditional advertising, and pushing people to the content. And so we started seeing not just a buildup of visitors and audience, but obviously that organic SEO traffic was really, really high, which led to really great conversions. We were seeing more quality conversions from our content. So again, just seeing those numbers of, high percentage of organic traffic and better conversions really led to me to be a big believer in content marketing. And having been a media guy, my whole from my background, I was a media production major in college, and then to add things like video and podcasts and things like that to the ecosystem really helped bring some authenticity and again more authority by using the internal experts at the organization.
So tell me then from there, and that's an incredible story, and I think the listeners are going to hear a little more when we go into each mistake and some of
Mm-hmm.
your key findings for each one. But tell me a little more then how Authority Agent. Tell me a little bit about your company and how that was founded and what you all do.
Yeah. So, there was kind of a bridge between my time at Episcopal Retirement Services, and I worked with the folks at Orchard Digital Marketing as a strategist and helped them with some of their content practices for organizations, both big and small. And one of the things that really had perplexed me, and I just didn't seem to have enough time, was how do you organize content? And that's something that we really took some time in working on. And so when I left Orchard Digital Marketing about a year ago and was really looking for my next step, I felt like in this new age of AI and even really seeing content maybe not being a priority in a lot of organizations and being strategic about their content marketing efforts. My partner, Allison Lang, and I really felt like we were on the precipice of developing this system that brought a strategy to content marketing. And we can get into some of this as we move along, but also an organizational system that really works for consumers as they go through their journey in looking into senior living. So we felt it was a really, I guess, niche option that maybe a lot of agencies hadn't focused on. I mean, there's plenty of agencies that do content and do content well, but content's a hard thing, and really to think about it strategically and then how to figure out how you can execute that, whether it's in an internal program at a senior living organization or partnering with an external, organization like ours or company like ours to produce the content, was something we really felt we could do and do really well and do very differently than maybe the majority of, what we see in the industry.
Yeah, I think, strategic, obviously, in my name. And I think
Mhm.
that's where I say this almost every episode when we talk about marketing is that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you're going to see those incremental increases, like you're saying, those quality conversions with the same spend or pretty close. And that's what I was seeing too is you have to be strategic in all of your disciplines.
Yeah.
It can't be,
Mhm.
well, we're just going to write a blog about this, or we're just going to put up these 5 pages,
Right.
and we'll get into these things. And so,
Yeah.
what we're about to talk about, what Bryan's going to really dig in here, I also feel very strongly about. I know that these little things, it seems so simple, right? It
Mhm.
seems, but if you're not strategic and you're not tailored, you're missing a big portion of your population, of your demographic. And how are we getting those conversions on the website?
Right.
So, agree completely. Let's dig in. So, the first mistake that we have here, it's kind of a twofold, but it's mostly just that you are talking at families instead of to them. And and to sum it up, is really just generic,
Yeah.
right? You're very generic. You're talking at them. You're not really bringing them in, you're not involving them in it, especially in this AI world.
Uh-huh.
So dig in for this a little bit, if you can, Bryan, into this mistake, and then really dig into some best practices that you recommend.
Yeah. And I think you probably see this a lot too, Natasha. Is one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of senior living organizations is they tend to be very generic and maybe a
Mhm.
little bit bland in their tone of voice. They might list their services. They may even list, all the floor plans and some of the starting pricing on there, but it really doesn't get into differentiating their brand and having a unique voice. And I think one of the things, if you can really think about what you want to accomplish, as you have some interactions with audiences, is how do you want that discussion to go, and how do you want to educate or build yourself as an authority? And I think, if you do the upfront work and think about all these things like your tone of voice and what does your brand stand for, what are those differentiators that you really want to kind of, I don't want to say sneak in, but have,
Yeah.
as themes that run throughout your content, it really makes it easier to write and or produce the content that you produce moving forward. the other thing that I don't see is a lot of people putting in that value proposition that maybe, again, that thing that differentiates your organization from the other, and putting that in. And then I think the other thing is, this is a real emotional decision. And I think writing emotion, whether it comes from the perspective of your staff that serves the residents, and what, because, I've seen so many examples of the joy that staff have in serving older adults, but also the emotion of the residents and their families, and to know, that they're making friends and they're engaged and they're thriving at a senior living community. There are so many rich storytelling, emotional opportunities, I think, that senior living organizations often miss out in doing. So,
Yeah. And I think one of my recent episodes, I'll link it here, where I talked about my top 5 just marketing strategies. That's number 1,
mhm,
is figuring out your differentiators and your strengths and making sure that's throughout all of your marketing.
yeah,
And I'm thinking of my listeners here thinking, yeah, we do that, right? We do a SWOT, we do our top 3 things,
mhm,
we focus on those strengths. And I have a whole nother episode about that, where it's like, are they really strengths? Are they really differentiators? But
right,
the point is, what I would like to push back on the listeners is, look at your website, like really,
hmm,
as if, and look at it as if, and it's hard to do when you're at the community. It's easier, of course, from a third party to look at it. But
yeah,
if think of yourself as, depending on what kind of community you are, if you are a family member or if you are a prospect, and you're reading through the pages, and what would the journey look like,
mhm,
and what are you clicking on, and like you just said, do you feel that story? Do you feel that the differentiators, your value proposition as you keep going? Not just like, okay, on the homepage, like, right, there's always like a boilerplate
mhm,
paragraph, and like all of the content. Does it tie together, and do you get that feeling throughout to create that differentiation, and to make them, like you said, those videos, make them want to convert and want to move forward and not go off your site?
right. Well,
Yeah.
and one other thing that I found, and was a real strength when I came into the organization, is, what are those reasons to believe those differentiators? If you can document,
Mm-hmm.
why you're a high quality care provider, and some of those things might be, you have high staff to resident ratios, or
Yep.
if you're a, continuing care retirement community or life plan community, and you have skilled nursing, and you typically have high, Medicare ratings, things like
Right.
that can really help build that credibility to all of the things that you're saying, whether it's benefits and or differentiators as well.
Yeah. No, agree. All right, we're going to go on, if you're okay, to mistake number 2. So the next one is creating content without buyer intent,
Mhm.
which is kind of similar a little bit to what we were talking about in terms of not following that, the value proposition. But, the idea of, and I think this came from you, is, rather than what should we post today,
Right.
it's more about what are families actually looking for.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about this? Because it's so important. I think we create content just, this is what we think they want. This is what we should post today. And just trying to come up with random slap it up,
Yeah.
rather than what is the journey? What's that buyer actually want, actually looking for, actually asking? So go ahead and dig into that for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. There's a couple parts to this, actually. And this was, again, I made this mistake very early in my career, and we were kind of guessing at the topics based on, maybe information we were getting from salespeople, or feedback that we were getting from the staff, or even just from our own experiences. And we were being a bit more reactionary and saying, oh, this would be a good topic for this month. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a real opportunity to, again, lay out your plan for developing your content really upfront at the beginning of a year, or even quarter by quarter, depending on how, your organization operates. But what's important about really figuring out how to organize that content is thinking about it by the consumer journey. If you think about, at the beginning, people are just trying to discover and research what senior living is and what it has to offer. Then you move into the stage of consideration, where you're looking at apples to apples, or apples to oranges, between organizations. And again, that's where you can really start differentiating and listing out, maybe some of the unique services or offerings or amenities that your community offers. And then you go into this decision-making process between communities, And again, that's where you want to differentiate and or have maybe some of that emotion brought into your storytelling. And then finally, it's that transition or that, getting people over that hump into the move-in. Because how many times have we all heard, I'm not ready yet? And,
Yeah.
there are a lot of opportunities to really do some storytelling. I think we all have done those events where we're, trying to host, that we're hosting that talk about downsizing or selling your home. But, there's a lot of things that I think that we as an industry and organizations can really bring to the table to help our sales teams kind of get over that final hump by, developing content and then again, distributing it via whether it's email or social media or things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine, and this is something I've gone through before, is as that family member's looking, imagine if you have all that content for them through that journey. Those questions that they're asking that you don't necessarily want to answer, which I think is the next mistake we're going to get to, but
Yep.
really making sure they don't have to go anywhere else.
Right.
They don't have to go to AI search because you are providing that for them. You're walking them through the hard parts of this conversation and this decision.
Yeah.
And you're walking them through each step and having all of that in place
Yep.
in terms of posting and blogs. And we'll get through that in all the content you're going to post. But
Yep.
very important. So let's go into the next one that I kind of segued to there. So the next mistake is making content just about the community instead of the problem.
Right.
And I see this all the time. This is one of my top things when I come in and do an assessment of a website. I'm sure you are too, is we don't want to give everything away. We don't want to give too much. We don't want to give them the pricing. You're like making their life harder, right? You're just doing the flashy things that frankly every other community does too.
Right.
You're just focusing on the flashy lifestyle and you're not really digging into the problem and the issues that they really want answered. So go ahead on this one, Bryan.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing, we talk about organization by the buyer journey, but I think at the end of the day, people are looking, are they going to be happy, at this community? Are they going to feel safe? Are they going to feel included? Are they going to be busy and engaged? And I think, we tend to treat senior living sometimes a bit like real estate, or sometimes, show the beautiful entrances and the beautiful gyms and dining areas. But, the engagement between people, I think really at the heart, I think is the most important thing. And even personally, my own mother lives in a senior living community and she doesn't talk about the stuff. She talks about the people and she says, these are people like family now. And I would never have imagined that for my mother, having grown up with her and being a bit of an introvert, to see how much the people and have really impacted her and her life, late in her later years. So it's really important to really pick out those, those emotional topics, but then you do have to have, how do I measure up the costs for, living at home versus living in a community? People really are coming and looking for, can I afford this? Or, what is the value that I'm getting at? So it is important to have that information, but then really balance the emotional side of everything. You really want to go in and dig in on your keyword research and look at the gaps, that maybe you'll find from your current content, not just, within your current blog, but maybe even within your website, and see how can I fill that in? And then how can I be more transparent with information about cost? I think there's a real opportunity for organizations, from what I've seen and the research that I've done, to really educate the potential customers and their families about what they get based on the cost content that's being offered or not being offered. I think we're getting a little better at doing that as an industry, but there's still a long way to go. How do people pay for it? When we're talking about CCRCs and life plans, is educating people about an entrance fee and why that's in place. So there's really a lot of opportunity to look at your current content and particularly at a cost and transparency standpoint of that, because you could lose people, from one organization that's sharing that information. And if you're not sharing any information at all, I've heard a lot of stories about people who get frustrated and just abandon that. that. So I think there's just a lot of, again, questions that people are coming into and are searching on, whether it's a question or maybe a short phrase. And those are the things that you should be thinking about including in your content.
Yeah, that was one of my top tips too in the website assessment. If you're reviewing your website, is having full transparency and having that education on there. And I also think, as you were talking, I was thinking of why this is so different now. And I think people know this, but we're going to say it out loud. Is the website always used to be top of the funnel, right?
Yeah.
So it used to just be, well, we're just going to get them here and then we're going to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the case anymore. Many times their entire journey is online. And so I think we know that, right, hypothetically, but I want all the listeners to hear and say that's now the new journey. And so what Bryan's talking about, what we're talking about here is in that content is taking them through that journey. They're going to then go to somewhere else to get that information, another website.
Right.
And so like you're saying, if you don't have that content, they're going to find it somewhere else. It doesn't mean they're going to call you. No offense, right? They're going to keep doing the intent that they have. They're going to keep searching online, and they're going to keep searching until they get an answer from who knows where.
Yep.
Would you rather them get the answer from you,
right,
or the answer from someone else? And I would think you want to be the authority, to your point, and you want to be their intent. You want to answer that question because they feel like, wow, you're transparent. Wow, you're giving us this education. You're explaining it to us. They're able to complete the full journey, read all that content on your website. You're going to then get a conversion. But that's the journey that they're going through. And I think if we just take a step back and realize this is a very different buyer journey than it used to be, even 5-10 years ago, and we just have to get behind it. And then like you're saying, our content and our journey needs to then follow that same, way as well.
Yeah. And I'm so appreciative of you bringing up this point about it's a journey, because my experience in looking at website traffic and website behavior is people come back and they come back again and they come back again. And what they're trying to do is, to your point, get their questions answered, or trying to envision them living in this community. They might be coming and looking at your photos. They may be coming back and looking at the great stories that you're telling within your blog. But if that's one way of really seeing intent, is if people are coming back and then coming back again. And again, what you said is, if you're answering their questions along all those different steps of the journey, you're really going to increase your likelihood of helping, really facilitate all the way into a move-in with that prospect. So
and I've heard, and I know my Life Plan CCRC listeners, and I get this pushback a lot with my clients of, well, we need to do the education, and you can do that now. We've got video. There's ways to do that now on your website, or even with infographics. We've gotten really creative. I know you have, Bryan, with all your video production. There's ways to do it now and explain it better and let them kind of understand and see that comparison of, they understand insurance. I'm not saying that Life Plan Community is insurance, right? I'm not saying apples to apples, but they understand that concept. And so being able to explain what they get for this, that's the value they get. There's ways to do it. And so I just think I don't want to say I'm tired of saying it, but I'm going to keep saying it until everyone does it. We have to get it on there, and there's a way to do it. Find the right partner, like Bryan and I, who can help you explain that and help you get the right content on your website.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, Natasha, these pieces of content can be sales enablement tools, right? This is content that our sales teams can really use as a check-in, especially as they're doing their discovery, or they're knowing maybe some issues that are a little more challenging, is, here's a video, or here's a blog, or here's a guide that provides a little bit more information. And again, it just helps build the credibility of that salesperson and the organization that prospect is dealing with.
Well, and I'm going to go back to budget, because I think that's what happens. Like you were saying in the beginning, many times, owner operators, marketing VPs, whatever, they cut this out of their budget, right? And then they put more spend on PPC.
Yeah.
And I've said it, I think in like 4 different episodes of, this is the stuff that mattered. Not that PPC doesn't, right? There's a place for it, and that's a different episode.
Yep.
But here it's about, because of the generative search and the AI search and all the new algorithms that keep coming out,
Mm-hmm.
this is more important than ever.
Yeah.
And like we said in the beginning, you're going to get more quality traffic,
Mm-hmm.
better traffic than just paid traffic that isn't necessarily the right traffic you want. And so this is the kind of stuff, this strategic, integral, really understanding who you are, really making sure we have that, full transparency, creating those videos, creating all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, maybe it's a little bit of an expense, but wow, the impact and the results you're going to see from it are fruitful.
Yeah, I compare content marketing to, really building a brand and doing the branding work. It's very foundational work that, if you do it well and continue to do it over time, it really can be the difference between higher occupancy and lower occupancy. Because to your point, you get a better, you're not just attracting more people, but you're attracting the right people who are searching for your product.
Oh, yeah.
And then
I've seen it work every time.
Mhm.
I really have. I mean, even just adjusting conversion points, just adding some videos, adding some, it's amazing how just some little tweaks, strategic, not just, which will take me to my next mistake,
Right.
strategic changes and things, not just, slapping something against the wall, but those strategic moves, little adjustments, takes me to my next mistake. So mistake number 4 is treating content like a creative exercise instead of a business lever.
Right.
So really it's making sure that this is a plan. This is a strategy based on your results, based on your occupancy. We're making strategic decisions, not just like because, we want to put up this fancy video for whatever reason. So dig into that a little bit for us.
Yeah. So one of the things that when I say we, Allison and I at Authority Agent really believe in is creating a content strategy. And, there are several steps to that. One is really figuring out what are the business objectives of an organization. That could be something as, little as maybe one community is struggling with memory care or assisted living and needing to have more emphasis, not just from an advertising standpoint, but maybe even from a content standpoint. Doing an audit is really an important part of looking at a company's, content strategy, looking at what do they currently have on their website. And again, breaking it down by the consumer journey. And then also what are the questions that consumers have within each part of those journey and seeing what do we have, what could be repurposed to maybe improved a little bit more. And then what are some of maybe the gaps that we can fill with new content is really important. Then you also, are looking at your performance, whether you're looking at Google Analytics or maybe if you're on HubSpot, they've got a lot of great reporting within HubSpot, again, to see what's working, what's not working, to improve, looking at your conversions on your website. Maybe you've got some landing pages. Maybe there's more opportunities to convert throughout your website that you can include. Maybe you can design your pages a little bit better to increase your chances of conversion. Again, how you merchandise the conversions and maybe even other content that's like-minded that will do well can really be a matter of shepherding people through that journey. There's also, when you look at an organization that really is maybe very strategic at the very top levels of the organization, one of the things we did at Episcopal Retirement Services was put an emphasis on memory care and creating a center of excellence around that. And what that looked like was, having a director that oversaw these initiatives that weren't just within the organization, supporting families and the residents that we serve, but also doing a lot of education and programming outside the community. So our marketing team really partnered and helped shape this center of excellence so that we were producing content and reflecting all of the great work. And so if you really look at it from a top-down strategic level of the organization, you can really help make a difference in establishing yourself as an authority on a specific topic, whether that's memory care or caregiving and assisted living or something like that.
Right.
So there's just all kinds of opportunities to, again, look at it from what are the business objectives, what are your gaps, what are you doing well? And then that all leads into a really strong editorial calendar and program and distribution program that you put together.
Yeah, it still to this day amazes me the lack of not that we have the analytics, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of digital agencies are providing the analytics,
Sure.
but it's the lack of true review of the analytics and what do they mean
Yep.
for the organization.
Yeah.
And that drives me crazy. And I literally spend most of my time doing that and
Yep.
helping clients, as
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you do, because
Yep.
I'm able to take that and go, okay, and I'm sure you do as well, as this is how this relates to your lead generation or to your occupancy results. And,
Right.
you're only, like you said, you're only getting conversions for this type of service line,
Mm-hmm.
which is full with the waiting list,
Right.
which happens often sometimes with IL, but they can't fill, right, their health center, things like that.
Yep.
And so to your point is, let's look at that, let's adjust that and adjust the plan and the strategy to align with that. And I just feel like I again, because I'm listening to us and I'm thinking of my listeners saying, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And of course it makes sense,
Yeah.
but it's really not, it's very often not being done. There isn't that strategic coordination
Mm-hmm.
ongoing with each of your vendors, making sure that's happening. And I want everyone to hear us saying it needs to be, it has to be fluid and it has to be adjusted
Yeah.
to go with that, to go with your goals, and make sure you're actually, what that data means. You know what those results mean. You know how that's going to relay. And yeah, sometimes it is testing things. It is some A/B testing, and it is
Right.
saying we think this would, and we make adjustments as we go. But it still shocks me, the lack of actual review of an audit process in general.
Yeah. And I like what you said there about really trying to, share information maybe with other agencies or other parts of an
Yes.
organization. When you can integrate your content efforts with your traditional advertising, your paid search, looking at your maybe digital advertising from a consumer journey standpoint as well, and how content can really help augment and give maybe more reason for a high intent buyer to come to your website. You just see this, I don't want to say virality, but there's just this building of more traffic, better, higher intent, higher qualified conversions. Yeah. And it really is fun to watch as it builds over the months.
And we're kind of segueing into the next one, but what I was going to say, kind of segues, is giving that content legs, kind of what you're saying. I think again, that drives me crazy when we create content. And I was seeing this and I didn't even realize sometimes some of the clients, the content they were creating. And I'm like, why aren't we using this? Right. This could be an event. This could be a speaking engagement. This could be in all of our sales teams, intro emails. This could be part of the marketing automation, which is a whole nother thing we could get into, of making sure that you've got a full automated journey that then cycles and uses this content. It's evergreen. Like there's so in print, and just, I could go on and on, but making sure you're using that to its full extent, because you're spending money on something, you're creating something. It's good content. You all came together, you came up with this. Let's use it. Use it well, right? And to get the full extent from it. So which takes me to my next one. So the last one, mistake number 5, which I love, is posting once and hoping. And I think that this is so common. I think I've seen this over and over again in terms of social media and just hoping, we'll just do some social posts and that's enough. So dig in a little bit to this one.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to this. I several years ago, I was watching a gentleman online talk about his approach to content, and it really impacted me. And he would create a piece of content, say at the beginning of the month, and he would then be able to use that and really hit the different messages, maybe take certain video clips and he'd create a blog out of it, and he'd create a landing page, and he would just hit it over and over again in this campaign window, whether it's a month or a quarter or not. But the point of that is, your content has legs that can be distributed in several different ways and even used in several different ways. But, just putting out a message one time, we all know that we need to get a message out. In the old days, it used to be 6 or 7 times to get somebody to memorize. It's probably even more now. I can't remember the statistics, but
it used to be 7. I bet it's like 14
exactly,
now. I'm not even kidding.
We all have shorter memories, right? So, but the point is, you can use that same piece of content over and over and over again, or as we talked about earlier, in a campaign that can be used in many different ways and in many different mediums. But it is important to have a distribution system in place, for that content. And as you hinted, once really isn't enough. We always know, the other big thing is, we always have a new flow of buyers coming in. There's always this flow of people. So they're experiencing things for the first time, whether they're getting an email or going to our social media. So you can post something, that you posted maybe 1 month ago and post it in, the next quarter. And people probably would not have seen that in the past. So really thinking about how you can repurpose or reuse, a topic over and over again. But getting back to being strategic, it's really, again, not just thinking about your editorial calendar, but your distribution calendar is really an important part of this process as well, especially when you know that there are key themes or topics or questions that people are going to, constantly come back to. And you can start with your social media calendar and look at it like a matrix and share those, those themes, not just with your content, but maybe there's, some photography and or videos that you can use that just live on its own on social media. But again, it's being strategic and setting up that calendar that's really important, and not being afraid to reuse or bring up, that same topic, because what you'll find is that same piece of content that may have gotten 50 views last month, will start multiplying more over the time that you're promoting it, whether it's in a email newsletter, your nurturing sequences, or your social media.
Yeah.
So
I think I loved what you said too when we spoke was a couple things I want to say is first thing before that is that I think many times social and the digital strategy and the content aren't connected, right? So many times you have, well, this person posts on social, this person does the content website strategy, this person does the blogs, whatever it might be.
Yep.
And I get that happens sometimes, but who are they all working together? Are they working with someone like Bryan or I, to strategize that? And if they're not, the point is they're not separate things. This isn't like, well, I have this thing I'm posting and I have this thing I'm doing. It's about, think of social, like you said, as, and this is where I'm going to quote you a little bit. I think you said it's like social's like an amplifier, not its own strategy.
Right.
So it's getting that, it's a platform to get the message out. Now, of course, yes, you're still going to have those great stories of things that happen at the community, and that's natural. But within that, right, that so it's like planned strategic content posts versus, the natural posts is how you're amplifying, you're getting all that content out. And so I just think that shift of brain of, because I've seen this with most of my clients, is this idea of content, website, blog, marketing automation, social, that they're not necessarily connected, or maybe they'll share one blog here and there, but no, it should be a complete strategic approach.
Yeah. And I think you and I were talking about this earlier, where content is your foundation for building your authority and trust with people. But then, there's so many ways of amplifying, whether that's, again, we talked about social and email, but you can also, I was working with a gentleman that was a really well-known content expert by the name of David Germano, and he talked about merchandising content throughout your website. And so you may have key questions in your blogs that you want to merchandise in another blog, or even maybe on your services page or other sections of your website, to really drive that traffic as well to the content that's going to answer questions. And the more you do all of these activities, again, the more you'll build that authority. People will come to your website through SEO and answer engines and AI answer engines. And those principles just work over and over and over again. I talked about this earlier. It's just fun to see that all kind of come together and take off.
Well, and you're building authority not only for your customer, right, who's on your site, but to Google. I mean, too, right? So you have to think of both, right?
And you want to, and the AI platforms too, right?
And now the AI platforms and all of that. So it's threefold there in terms of the results.
And the other thing about distribution is there's other platforms beyond your website to really consider posting. We talked about video, and that's not only a great way to build authority and build trust, because people can see that personality, whether it's through your experts in your organization or your sales team, talk using video, or your marketing team, doing videos. But then it also builds authority within, the search engines and the AI platforms as well, because they're now going through those videos and pulling information out. We hear that about Reddit, LinkedIn, all these platforms that, they, these search engines and answer engines are going out to really find information even beyond just the platform that you're providing as well. So
Yeah.
that's
And
important in
so
distribution.
I think I know this is a lot and overwhelming. I know this is a lot. And I'm thinking, if I was
Yeah.
a salesperson listening to this, or a marketing person at a community level, this feels overwhelming.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be,
Right.
because there are people who do this. And I think that's what's important is
Yeah.
there's no way you, as a salesperson, or even the marketing person overseeing, because I've done that. I
Right.
know what that's like. So have you.
Yeah.
We know what that's like. There are partners who can walk you through this
Yeah.
strategy, and I'm going to have Bryan kind of close with this, but it is overwhelming. There are a lot of steps,
Mhm.
but it's not, it can be simple.
Yeah.
Once we talk about the strategy and the approach,
Yep.
it can be simple. So can you just, for those that are feeling overwhelmed by this process, where should they start at this point?
Yeah, I think, again, finding a good partner, one of the reasons that we started Authority Agent, and I talked about this a little bit, about setting strategy and, knowing all the elements and the questions that consumers are going to have. But we also wanted to create systems that were really easy for our clients to implement, and whether they're doing it themselves. Maybe we're setting up AI agents that can help them write the content that they need to do. Maybe we're helping set up processes that are easy to create a video, but, and then to do it effectively, efficiently, and as low cost as possible, because we all know that videos can cost thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to shoot. But there are ways of really making it turnkey, and maybe even doing it in-house, for reasonable time and money. So
Right.
we really felt that, if you take it step by step, and again, build these processes that make it easy to turn it, because content is not easy. But if you break it down step by step, process by process, it really becomes a part of what you do day in, day out, whether you have an internal team doing it or an external partner that can help you produce things like Authority Agent or an agency. So that's
No, thank you, Bryan. This is really helpful. It's helping me realize I need to do some of this with with my content
yeah,
if I had the time.
yeah,
But just before we leave, again, thank you so much for being on today. I think this is incredible for people to take back with them and kind of analyze. But what are some top, I know we kind of ended with what should they do now, but just a couple key takeaways
yep.
they want to make sure they remember.
Yep. Well, I think, again, really starting with that audit process to see what you have, what you can repurpose and what gaps you need to fill is really important. And that can really help, at least start your plan. And that's what we recommend to our clients or prospective clients as a place to start. Again, also aligning to your organization's business goals. Again, if you're having challenges with occupancy at certain communities, you can certainly work on filling that. Or again, as we talked about, if there's strategic priorities, you can really support your organization, with content through that organization. Again, plan intentionally, that editorial calendar, that distribution calendar. If you can't maybe do it on a yearly basis, do it at least quarterly, because, what I've experienced and what I've seen others is sometimes the can just keeps getting kicked down the road, and without that plan in place, it can lack to some maybe lack of discipline, and maybe not really being able to fulfill the objectives you are doing. And then, again, when you're building authority and that expertise in the marketplace, it just keeps building and building and building. It compounds, and it just leads, again, to, higher intent traffic and higher quality leads at the end of the day. So,
Well, and I was going to say too, and track those results, because I think a lot of times, like we said earlier, many think that they do or are told they have a strategic content plan.
yeah,
Dig into that data, that audit, those results. That's part of that process.
right.
Is it right? Is it working for you? And if it's not, then let's adjust it. It can be changed throughout the year. So thank you so much, Bryan. Again, Bryan Reynolds, Authority Agent. I'll have his site linked here. Check them out, and maybe they can help you with your content. I definitely need a little bit of help with getting my website a little ramped up too. So thank you so much, Bryan, for being on. And thank you all for watching another episode of the Drake Insights podcast. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye. Real quick, if you enjoyed watching the podcast today, please follow me and subscribe so you're notified for the next podcast. And if you have any questions or want to talk after about anything that Drake Strategic can provide for you, please reach out to me, call me, email me, or visit our website at drakestrategic.com.